How's it going, OFPs? And welcome to another episode of the Off-Field Players Podcast, the only podcast for aspiring sports industry professionals. I'm your host, Phillip, and I hope everybody's having an awesome week or weekend by the time you're listening to this. And it's already getting into the holiday season. Sports is off and rolling, at least for the winter sports. Basketball, hockey, football is right in the midpoint of the season. There's a lot happening right now in the sports world, but also there's a few other things to look forward to as well. A lot of specialty events that are taking place this month. I know if you're a motorsports fan, even though the NASCAR season has just officially wrapped up with Ryan Blaney winning the championship this past weekend, Formula One is still going on. Actually, if you're here in the United States, you probably are aware that Formula One is doing a lot more races here in the United States in 2023, with the upcoming race being the Las Vegas Grand Prix. So definitely a unique event to look forward to. And of course, with Las Vegas being a hot market for sports right now, well, in my case, I like to call Vegas the flavor of the month. I mean, yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye out for. And also a future topic to discuss here on the Off-Field Players Podcast, as, again, Formula One is, a big business in motorsports and entertainment, and just a geographical standpoint that's having now globally, it's definitely something to discuss and also something to be aware of. But we're not talking about Formula One today. We're talking about something else. But before I go into today's topic, I want to make sure to remind everybody that if you're watching the video version on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share the link with anybody that you know is trying to work in the sports industry. And also, if you're listening to the audio version of this episode, either on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or Radio Public, highly recommend that you leave a 5-star review and also share the link with anybody else that you know, as it really does help grow the podcast to millions around the world, trying to get more listeners, trying to get more people aware about the opportunities to work in the sports industry, not just domestically, but globally as well. And also, just continuing to grow the reach on social media, where you can follow the Off-Field Players Podcast at OFP_podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Again, you can follow the Off-Field Players Podcast on Instagram and TikTok at OFP_podcast. So with that being said, I want to go into today's discussion, where we're going to be taking a deep dive into the WNBA in particular. So as everybody knows, the NBA season is off and rolling, and the WNBA season just wrapped up a few weeks ago with the Las Vegas Aces winning the WNBA championship, going back-to-back. So hats off to them for continuing their strong success as one of the young upcoming teams, not just in the WNBA, but really in professional sports. I mean, if you go to the Las Vegas Aces social media pages, I mean, they do a great job at branding themselves, and especially when you play in a city like Las Vegas, where sports is starting to have a stronger grasp on the city, from an aspect of team sports. If people know about the history of sports in Las Vegas has a very young history with professional sports teams. I mean, Vegas has always been known as a city where the big budget boxing matches take place, or maybe some one-off events when basketball or football would take place. But now, with the new incoming teams like the Raiders, or like the Golden Knights for the NHL, and of course with the Las Vegas Aces, and even I do have to say it because it is a big topic, with the possibility, I'll just put it that way, of the Oakland A's moving to Las Vegas in the near future. There's so much going on right now, and even the talks of an NBA expansion team being located in Las Vegas as well. So there's a huge market right now, and certain things to look forward into. But I want to look a little bit more on the player side of the WNBA, and also, which has been a really long going discussion for how the WNBA player has been, or WNBA as a league has been seen over the years, and just the different kind of disparities that of course some of us are aware of when it comes to player salaries. So just to give a little bit of a background about the WNBA. So WNBA was a league founded by the NBA on the strength of David Stern when he was the commissioner of the NBA back in the 90s, where he wanted to establish a league that would be pertained to women basketball players. So he founded the Women's National Basketball Association back in 1997. And 1997 was the first year of the league. Of course, well, with any new kind of professional sports league, there's always going to be growing pains and also trying to understand what the reach is. But as the years have gone on, the WNBA teams have been plopped in different cities all across the United States. And it was actually just announced recently that the Bay Area is going to be getting a WNBA expansion franchise in the next couple of years. 2025 is supposed to be the first year for the WNBA Golden State team, as the Warriors are having their ownership group be a part of helping with the foundation of putting an expansion team in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, definitely a strong growth there. And also with the big market that the Bay Area is, it's great that the WNBA is going to have an expansion team in that area. And, just even with, the other big markets that have WNBA teams like New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, of course, Vegas, Atlanta being another one, Chicago. There's plenty of teams dispersed around the country where there is that reach. But on the other hand, however, despite the reach that the WNBA and the opportunities that's been giving to women basketball players from all over the world, there still has been a long battle of player pay when it comes to just the salary reach. And as we look at the game of basketball these days, it's a global game. Like aside from soccer, basketball is one of the most popular sports in the world. It's played in every country. And of course, if you look at the landscape of the NBA, there's been this huge influx recently of international players coming from different countries and just dominating in the NBA. We think about Giannis Antetokounmpo coming from Greece, Nikola Jokic coming from Serbia, Luka Doncic coming from Slovenia. Even players like Yuta Watanabe coming from Japan. And even Victor Wembanyama coming from France. There's always been this long history of international reach and international growth that the WNBA has been trying to the NBA has been trying to accomplish over the years, and also having that correlate to with the reach that the WNBA can have, because there's also some WNBA players that are coming over internationally as well. But in regards to just the growth trying to align well with the WNBA, despite it being a very young league, it hasn't been able to reach the revenue goals of the NBA like their founding partner. But I want to take this time to discuss who I believe should be the first $1 million salary WNBA player as time goes on. Because with how well the league did this year, from viewership, from merchandise sales, ticket sales, I think it's due time for us to have the first $1 million salary WNBA player. But I want to go a little bit more back in regarding just the history of salaries across the league, and just giving you some recent numbers for what I've been able to research in regards to what the WNBA players are making these days. So if we go to 2022, the average league salary was $102,757. And the highest league salary for that year, 2022, was $228,094. And the highest paid player salary wise for that time was Diana Taurasi of the Phoenix Mercury. And now, if we go on to this year, the average league salary did have a bit of an increase, where the league salary is raised to $148,000 around that. And then the highest league salary was $234,936, which again is held by Diana Taurasi of the Phoenix Mercury, and as well as the players that have also had the same salary range as Diana Taurasi. We had Enrique Agumbawale of the Dallas Wings, as well as Jewel Lloyd of the Seattle Storm. So the highest cap, or like the highest salary of the stars of the WNBA is going up to $235,000, compared to when you look at the NBA. Like the player salaries are up in the 50 millions, the 60 millions, at least in a few years. And there's even been projections of somebody becoming the first $100 million salary player. Again, we don't know who that is yet, but from what the numbers show, and from what these contracts have shown, there is going to be that possibility of having a $100 million salary player in the NBA at some point. But even if you look at the average salaries for the NBA, like they're still in the very low millions, and even like the league minimum is still over the $500,000 threshold. Now, with the WNBA players having this this a low amount of salary in their player contracts with their WNBA teams. This is forcing most WNBA players, especially the star players, to take the off season to go overseas because they're getting paid a lot more to play over there. I mean, the WNBA season in particular is relatively shorter than the NBA season. The WNBA season is about 40 games in the regular season, and even the playoffs, which is something that I kept up with this year. The playoffs aren't even as long either. And one of the struggles of the WNBA having TV viewership, at least from how I've seen it historically, is that when we think about the NBA, like during the summer, they have their summer league, they have the draft, like of course, then free agency with the off season, and the WNBA season does take place during that time, during the summer months, leading all the way into kind of close to the beginning of preseason for the NBA, which is around mid October. So with just all like this confliction in the schedules, this is where the viewership has historically struggled. But in this case, for this year, viewership did go up as there's been like a record breaking, like there was a record breaking year for the WNBA overall, and they had 36 million unique viewers on social media, which is actually a 27% increase from where it was last year. And when it came to regular season games being watched, there was a 16% increase in viewership dating back to last year. And when it comes to just the exposure that they had on social media, there were 373 million video views on social media platforms for the league. And this is all the information coming from the WNBA themselves. Like they were able to track these stats and promote it to where, hey, it was a great year for us. It was one of the greatest years in the league's entire history, which is great overall. And even just with that alone, that's starting to show just the impact that the WNBA is beginning to have on sports, and especially on women professional sports. Because when we think about other women professional sports leagues like the National Women's Soccer League, of course, if other women leagues as well, they're still having some time of growth because and in one particular case, these leagues are still relatively young. I mean, 1997, like believe it or not, it wasn't that long ago. But at the same time, we're living in a time where sports for women is starting to become more respected, more globalized, and more popular because of all the changes socially that we're seeing nowadays, which is a great thing. And but at the same time, I personally feel that it's due time that we see a $1 million salary athlete in a women's professional team sport or team league. Because when we think about women athletes in other sports, yeah, like in individual sports like tennis or track, like they're getting paid millions of dollars on the endorsement side as well as the prize money. I mean, like so Serena Williams. I mean, she made a ton of money in her lifetime as a tennis player, and it's just been great all over, and she's been an inspiration for why female athletes should be getting the same opportunity as male athletes. And when it comes to team sports, however, that's where we start to see some of the disparities. Because I think when we think about individual women athletes and we see the money that they're able to make, like in their sport, that's where we tend to forget that, it's not the same everywhere. It's not the same for women soccer players, not the same for, women, softball players, basketball players. I mean, it's just not the same. But what's great to know is that, we're starting to see more growth. We're starting to see more, exposure to women's sports. And especially just with me being around the industry, like in the places that I've worked, there's more women working in the front offices. I mean, and I've talked about this before in previous episodes where, like when we think about, just the certain positions that have always been male dominant in the sports industry, they've always been held by men. But nowadays we're starting to see women take on general manager roles. We're starting to see coaching roles. We're starting to see, women take on, scouting roles. I mean, there are opportunities out there, and it's great that we're living in a time where we can be able to have the equal value for women's for women sports professionals as well as male sport professionals. But just not to get a little bit too off track with that, I want to go back to talking about the WNBA and just their salary standpoint right now. So going back to me getting to the discussion of why WNBA players like choose to go overseas to play more as well as earn more money, because there's a lot more money to be made. Like if you're going to play over in Spain, going to play in Russia, and even in France, and even though it's been kind of simmered down a little bit, but with the whole case of Brittany Griner, having to go over to Russia to play professionally during her off season when she wasn't playing with her WNBA team in the Phoenix Mercury. That was her way to make additional money playing basketball, and it's coming to a point to where the WNBA is trying to stop that, which is a little bit concerning, especially with the state of the possibility of what's going to be entailed in the new CBA that's going to be coming up for the WNBA soon. Like the CBA is supposed to be renewed in 2027, and according to this article that I found on like through the Associated Press, there's that there like in one of the paragraphs it says that from a purely basketball standpoint, the CBA will make it more difficult for WNBA players to compete overseas in the future. Beginning in 2023, there will be a new WNBA prioritization rules that will be enforced by the league. Any player with more than 3 years of service who arrives late to training camp will be fined at a 1% rate of base salary per day late. In addition, any player who does not arrive before the first day of the regular season will be ineligible to play at all that season. In 2024 and thereafter, any player who does not arrive before the first day of training camp or with respect to unsigned players finish playing overseas will be ineligible to play for the entire season. And then it goes into saying that the WNBA typically begins training camp in late April and the regular season starts in early May. Some foreign leagues do not end before those dates. Now, when I read that, I want to, kind of decipher some of the stuff that they're talking about and how there are some disparities with this. So, I'll start from like the bottom where it talks about how the WNBA typically begins training camp in late April and the regular season starts in early May. So the problem with this is that when we think about the NBA playoffs, when they begin, or like when the NBA regular season wraps up, is mid-April, and the playoffs, it really stretches into like this 1.5 month timeline where from the first round all the way to the end of the NBA finals, and like the NBA finals usually ends around early to mid June. I mean, again, it's already interfering with just the viewership count that the WNBA has, because people are already tuned into the NBA playoffs, and in this case, the NBA finals. So like just with the confliction of schedules and the timing of when the league starts, there's like the WNBA doesn't really get early enough viewership like at the start of the season, and especially with this new idea of the NBA where they're instilling the NBA in-season tournament as a way to get viewership early on in the season with the big matchups, and also trying to get the football crowd to still keep up with football, but at the same time still keep up with basketball as the season starts, and just having the in-season tournament early on where even though the early season games haven't really mattered as much over the years, with this new format is going to matter more, where they want to get people tuned in as early as possible. And now going into the salary, where when we think about the players that are coming over from overseas, if they show up late to training camp, they're going to be fined at a 1% rate, even though that may not sound like a lot, especially with what the salaries are right now for the WNBA, it's still a big problem. It's a really big problem that even though there's not a lot of high salaries to be given out at the moment, especially with the salary caps that most WNBA teams have at the moment, like finding them at a 1% rate, I mean, it's kind of tough, especially just knowing that once they're done playing in overseas, and I'm not too into like what the overseas landscape of basketball is, because but what I do know is that their season at times doesn't really align with what the NBA season aligns with. And just knowing how strenuous it can be to play a summer here. I have a 40 game regular season, and then go play in another country for another a few months, and then having to come back over here. There's hardly any time and day. I mean, like most WNBA players don't really have an off season. I mean, like there's like off seasons don't really exist, just especially knowing what the salaries are. And from and on top of that, just to go from the beginning of what the paragraph said, I was talking about how with the new CBA, the possibility of of WNBA players being barred from going to play overseas during the off season, that's not really fair. I mean, there has to be some kind of something that can like some resolution to be able to tell the players like, hey, you don't have to go play overseas because we want you to stay here because you're the stars of the league, and if you get hurt overseas, then like there's like that's a problem for us because we can't promote you or your team. Well, there has to be some kind of substitute to not allow players to go overseas if this is going to be an issue. I mean, it's great that we're able to have a product here on American soil for WNBA players and women athletes to have these kind of opportunities. But if we're barring them from going to play somewhere else so they can have additional income, then what is that saying about us as Americans? To what we allow women athletes to have. I mean, and I don't want to get super political about it or anything, but that this has to make sense. Like there has to be some kind of incentive to want to stay more here in the States rather than take talents overseas, where because overseas women athletes are more respected. And I'm not just saying that, it actually proves. I mean, I think when we think about leagues in Europe or leagues in Asia, there's more of an emphasis on the participation of women athletes than it is here in the States, and I think also women athletes are more respected in different parts of the world compared to how they're respected here, because again, it's just cultural values in some way, and also just the appreciation for athletics overall being prevalent in other countries. But again, it's just something to really take into consideration. It's something that you know boggles my mind. And I can only say so much as a man to where you know how am I to decide how much a woman athlete should be paid. Like it's just something that I have an opinion about, because in a way I feel like if we're taking the popularity of this particular sport or this particular game, it should be equal all across the board. And all more reason why it's due time for like a WNBA player to have $1 million salary. I mean, like I know there's been growing pains in this course with just still how young the WNBA is as a league. We're living in a different time. I mean, there's tons of money to be made in the sports industry. I mean, it's $1 billion industry that's going to grow bigger, bigger, and bigger as time goes on. And what's great is that there's a lot more respect for women athletes now, and also just women's sports in particular. I was working yesterday. We have a TV in the office in my place of employment. I was like, we had the women's college basketball on the TV because it's the start of college basketball season, both for men's and women's, and it was Notre Dame playing South Carolina, and they were having their season opener over in Paris. And like the idea of like, oh wow, two college teams playing in Paris, and they even said that was the first time ever that an NCAA basketball game has been played in the city of Paris. And just knowing that the women's teams had the first go of that, and be able to make history and put that their stamp of approval to be like, hey, we're popular enough to go play in Paris in front of a world audience on ESPN. I mean, that's saying something. That's saying that we can show the effort to really help promote women's sports. And the same can be said from the OFP perspective, to where when we see women working for professional sports teams, I mean, like, yeah, we do need to have like, ERG groups. We do need to have more promotion for, women that hold VP level or C-suite level positions and roles in sports organizations. Because, there's a lot of great professionals for like women working in professional sports right now. I mean, there's much opportunity and also much due opportunity that they've deserved to be where they are. And hopefully when it comes to like just how we can support women athletes from the player side and not just the OFP side, you know, that's where we win. That's where we win, because like, yeah, we're already doing a great job at helping women on the OFP side, getting them in the bigger roles, getting them the salaries that they deserve, getting them the publicity and the promotion that they've earned like through their hard work and dedication, and just even the like the support that women have been giving in corporate America overall. It's great, but we still need to see more of that from the athletic perspective. And despite this being a podcast that is sole purpose is to help promote people to get into the sports industry as off-field players, at the same time we need to use our reach as off-field players to still be able to promote and support the on-field players, because when we both win, that's where magic happens. That's where greatness happens. But just going a little bit more into just what the WNBA has been able to do, especially with their popular team. The best team in the league right now is the Las Vegas Aces, and with them being back-to-back champions in the WNBA and just their strong promotion on social media, it's saying something. And even like as we go more further, and me revealing who I think should be the first $1 million WNBA player, we can't forget about the stars. And with the Las Vegas Aces right now, hands down, they have one of the best players in the league in Aja Wilson. Aja Wilson, has been dominating in the WNBA since she entered the league, and it's a shock to me that when I look up the stats of what these WNBA players, how they perform, it's amazing to me how the highest salary doesn't even crack $500,000 a year. I mean, if we can get to $500,000 a year for the high salary player, then that's progress. But at the time, it's going to be due time where somebody overshoots that and gets the $1 million salary. Because as I looked at the statistics of what the WNBA salaries were, like, yeah, like there's some players that have salaries like on a 4 year, like a max, like what a max contract would be in the WNBA. It's like 1 million exactly. That's the max contract compared to an NBA player where the max contract could be 150 million, 200 million, 300 million, like you name it. I mean, this is a very wide threshold for where the salaries are, and there are some certain disparities with that where it's incredible how like the max salary for a WNBA player is so relatively low, and just like is outbeat by a country mile compared to what a max salary in the NBA could get you. But I think with the small increments that can be made, especially with how many more fans are showing up to games, how many more people are starting to watch the games. Again, the viewership for both the regular season and the playoffs for the WNBA, along with just how many people bought tickets and attended games. Again, like they broke records this year, and I feel like with that and with just that alone, because when you have those kind of numbers where it's that high, where you see those 16% increases from the previous year, revenue goes up with it. And when that happens, then that's where the teams get pay more players. So it's great that we're getting folks to the games, and it's great that we're having more people become tuned into what the WBA is doing, because like from my time when I watched or when I broadcasted women's basketball at St. John's. I mean, it like our women's team made the NCAA tournament, and even though we beat some big teams, fans still weren't showing up to the games. And whenever I walked inside Carnesecca Arena and I would broadcast a women's basketball game for St. John's, I would just look around just inside the arena, seeing how many fans would show up, and it doesn't get as packed, and especially if the team was winning. Like the team was winning, and folks still weren't showing up. And I just looked at it like, man, like what else did I have to do? I mean, there's always been a common saying in sports to how if you win, like all your problems are solved. But in this case, like it wasn't like that. I mean, yeah, like you win, but and when you win, you expect more folks to show up. Well, this is where the support for certain teams comes into play as well. You know, for what the WNBA can do a lot better for the teams around the league, and especially with the star players around the league, is promotion. You need that star power. For those that listen to my episode about the National Cycling League and how I think it could be the next, next big major professional sports league in the United States, what I mentioned influencer power. I mentioned star power, like promote, like marketing the teams on a regular basis. Having a national TV contract. Well, the WNBA already has that. Like they have a deal with ESPN for nationally televised games. Like they promote their teams in any way they can. Like they have like their like WNBA stars like Kelsey Plum, Brianna Stewart, Asia Wilson, Diana Taurasi showing up in commercials. So they're doing everything right. It's just how are we going to transfer that marketing aspect over to trying to get more fans in the seats, more people like rushing home after work to tune into a WNBA game. I mean, like how are we going to do that? I mean, there needs to be a lot more of a push to try to get those numbers to continue to go higher and higher to the heights where it becomes astronomical. And I believe it will do that. But with that in mind, we also have to think who's going to be the face of the league. I mean, what the NBA has done so great historically, especially when David Stern, when he was alive and was the commissioner, like same with Larry O'Brien, is that they were able to find a way to determine who the face of the NBA was going to be for the time that they were in it. Like you go back to the '80s with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. They were the faces of the league. The '90s, you had Jordan, dominated face of the league. Early 2000s, you look at Kobe, you look at LeBron when he was coming up, and even in the present day, like we have players like LeBron who's still the face of the league. So what can the WBA do to have that gravitation to really determine who the face of the league should be? Should it be Asia Wilson? Should it be Brianna Stewart? Should it be Sabrina Ionescu? I don't know. Like that's for them to figure out. But this is really my segue into who I think should be the first $1 million salary WNBA player should be. And just from all the data, like all the history, like all the research that I've been able to do, and really trying to dial down who the first $1 million salary WNBA player should be, I come to the moment of truth of who I believe should have that title. And spoiler alert, that player isn't in the WNBA yet. So, with that being said, I believe that the first $1 million salary WNBA player should be Caitlin Clark. And again, I know it's probably going to be a debate for a lot of people, but when I look at Caitlin Clark, yes, she does have for last year at Iowa this year, and she was projected to be the first overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft. But when I look at her, she can play. And just her game alone, I mean, it's out of this world. And especially just with like how the game is nowadays with the emphasis on 3-point shooting. I mean, I was watching Caitlin Clark last year in the Women's March Madness, and she was killing it. And she was killing it. I mean, like, there's a reason why Iowa made it all the way to the championship. And just with how big of a reach that she has, just like not just on Iowa, but just on the nation and even on the global reach. I mean, like she's just incredible. I mean, and her story of just being like a hometown product, just staying in state, and just helping her hometown school get to a Final Four. I mean, there's so much the possibilities with how you could promote her, and let me not forget, like early, like or like a few months ago, when or not a few months ago, well, last month when Iowa women's basketball was in preseason, they had an exhibition game against DePaul at Iowa's football stadium, Kinnick Stadium, and that place was sold out. Like they said that they had 56,000 fans at that game, and guess what? Caitlin Clark, she dropped a triple double with 34 points. And if she's able to do that in front of 56,000 people and perform like that in front of a national audience, I mean, that's really just saying, like, like that girl can play with the best of them. I mean, like, name a WNBA player, or when they were in college, who was able to sell out an entire football stadium and play at that level, just have that kind of performance. Or even just name like a WNBA player in recent history that is a consistent shooter, can shoot from all sides of the field, has like a just the national reach all across the board, and can just dominate. So, and I think also just the timing of it, because yeah, remember, this is Caitlin Clark's last year at Iowa. She's gonna be, of course, she's gonna be entering the draft next year, 2024. And even just with how fast the WNBA is growing, because if you think about, say, if we take Caitlin Clark, take her in her rookie season, she dominates it, kills it, becomes a national phenomenon, and just continues that trajectory all the way until, let's say, her fourth year in the league. Because by the time when she reaches her fourth year, the new CBA for the WNBA is going to pass, or is going to have already passed. And again, like, they're still in discussion for how they want to organize this CBA, but like, as like with if the WBA keeps going at the rate that they're going right now, especially with the integration of Caitlin Clark, then it's going to transfer in over to more astronomical revenue growth for the league, and Caitlin Clark is going to be at that point where she's going to be a star. She's going to be in her prime, and around that time, I expect her to be the first $1 million salary WNBA player. I don't know for what team, but whichever team she's on, she better be getting paid. And that's just how I'm going to see it. And I'll be honest, like, I did have honorable mentions for the current players that I also believe should be $1 million salary players in the upcoming years. Of course, Aja Wilson. Aja Wilson is out of this world. Like, again, just fundamentally sound, scores all across the floor, like solid on defense. I mean, Aja Wilson was another player that I had in mind for a WNBA player that I can see having $1 million salary. Same could be said about Sabrina Ionescu. Like, Sabrina Ionescu is a star, just especially with her playing in a market like New York. I mean, what trips me out is that the New York Liberty aren't like the most well known team like in the league. I mean, you're playing in the biggest market in the country, and you have one of the best players in the league like at that as well. So yeah, I feel that something's not adding up, because Sabrina Ionescu, and keep in mind, she actually just did get her or was it Breanna Stewart? Oh no, well, it was either Breanna Stewart or Sabrina Ionescu, like, just signed their first shoe deal. It was Nike. Nike signed one of them to their first ever shoe deal, and like, there's opportunities, and then what stresses me out is that when an athlete plays in New York and they're getting the short end of the stick of the endorsement opportunities, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy how you can have a star player in like a huge market, a market that has a long history of successful sports, but at the same time, you can't market them well. That definitely needs to be improved. And I hope to see Aja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, Brianna Stewart to have the same kind of salaries that Caitlin Clark is going to have when the league continues to grow, or by the time the league reaches their new CBA agreement. But that's really all I have to say about it. And I hope everybody takes this into consideration. Again, this is just how I feel about it, and also I'm hoping that my my research and just my like my push for a why there should be $1 million salary WNBA player was good enough for people to listen, for people to hear it, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point, and when it does happen, people could come back to this and be like, "Hey, Phillip was right." And yeah, we're just waiting for it. We're waiting to see it, and I feel like it's going to happen sooner than we think. But that's going to wrap it up for me on the Off Field Players podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's episode, and also, taking, this episode into consideration, and even just thinking about, the opportunities that the WNBA is going to present in the future for the OFPs that are, interested in wanting to get into that field, wanting to work in basketball, wanting to work close with, women athletes, because they need the help, like they really do. And we're living in a time right now where women's sports are on the up, and it's up to, not just me, but to everybody else that's in the OFP spectrum to continue to support women working in sports, women that play sports, and also giving them the opportunities that they deserve and that that they rightfully deserve. And I just think, as time goes on, as we continue to have more equality in the sports realm, there's going to be some big changes in a good way. So just want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode. And as a reminder, if you watch the video version on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And also hit the notification bell to be on the lookout for future episodes. And if you listen to the audio version, either on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or Radio Public, make sure to give me 5 stars, and also share the link with anybody that is interested in working in the sports industry. It helps out a ton when we can share the podcast and encourage more people to learn more about the sports industry, and also educate people about the intricacies of what it's like to work in the industry, just not just domestically but globally as well. And lastly, you can follow the Off Field Players podcast on social media at OFP_podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Again, it's at OFP_podcast on Instagram and TikTok. So with that being said, just want to thank everybody again for tuning in. If you listen to this episode all the way to the end, and also make sure to stay on the lookout for the next upcoming Off Field Players podcast episode. The next one is going to be a pretty exciting one, so I'm actually pretty excited to talk about it, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to save it for the next time. But I just want to thank everybody again for supporting the podcast. Continue to be safe, continue to be strong, stay healthy, stay blessed, stay motivated, and as always, make sure to achieve what you believe.